You were supposed to say the boss, not my. Yeah, no, it's okay. Next time. Now, thank you very much. That was a very, very kind introduction. And thank you all for being here today, coming out today, to hear a talk that I care a lot about, but I have also literally never given before. So we're going to see how it goes. I'm going to use my cell phone a little bit to cheat, but I think about this a lot. I care a lot about strategy. You know, I have a little bit of a reputation as being like a marketing or provocateur kind of person, and that's honestly because of the way that I think about strategy. It's because I think it's sort of necessary and important that this stuff be done. So that's the way I think about things. And so I want to open this talk by proposing two things that may kind of seem in tension. My first claim is that libertarians, people who hold libertarian views, have mostly been losing for at least a century. We could argue maybe the time frame is longer, but I'm going to kind of take as a premise that for the last century, most of what's happened has moved libertarianism backwards. We have fewer rights that we believe in. There are some victories, of course. I'm not saying it's wholly backwards, but and at the same time, I am happier to be alive now and today than any time in history. I think, like I don't long to be in some past, and I'm more optimistic for the future than I've ever been in my life, okay? Despite thinking, what I just said about things continuing to get worse. So I want to kind of reconcile those two things. I'm not going to explain the premise that, for the most part, liberty has losing. We're just going to accept that. So we can look at what's sort of been happening in terms of trying to make the country more libertarian. We have national politics, both through the Libertarian Party, which I'm a member of, I'm a supporter of, but I think has accomplished very little in the last 50 years. In fact, the opening essay of the Free State, that founded the Free State Project, written by Jason Sorens, it was written over just a little over 20 years ago. And the opening essay, the opening paragraphs, kind of throw down the gauntlet. They say he makes this wager about what the Libertarian Party will accomplish in the next 20 years. And he claimed that it would accomplish basically nothing, that it couldn't make the country more libertarian. And that was a 20-year prediction. He said in 20 years that won't happen. And he ended up correct. And this was kind of him saying, laying out the beginning of what became the Free State Project strategy. And also through the Republican Party, right? Attempts have been made. We had the Ron Paul campaign, right? Which certainly accomplished things, but I don't think it made the country meaningfully more libertarian. So that's like, it makes me nervous to kind of say that because I love Ron Paul, but Ron Paul accomplished a lot, arguably the most successful libertarian, right? But he didn't make it to the top of Everest. Okay, we did not achieve a libertarian society, a libertarian state, or whatever, maybe that's the wrong word for it, but we didn't attain that through the Ron Paul movement. We didn't. We have seasteading, right? This idea that you could start a new country in international waters, and that this ought to be legal to do. I think the reality is that international law isn't real, and I'm going to come back to this concept throughout the talk a couple of times, this difference between what is the stated way, the stated legal set of affairs, what the policy ought to be, and sort of what actually happens, because these are frequently very different things in the real world. And so, it's supposed to be legal that if you build something in international waters 12 miles off of the coast, that you're in international waters. No country lays claim to that, and you could be theoretically wholly independent. I don't know, a guy named Chad Elwartowski did that in Thailand just a couple of years ago. Thailand just came and arrested him and threatened to kill him. Believe it or not, no government stood up for Chad. You believe that? I was shocked. I was not. Sealand is an example a couple of decades back. It's a what do you call it, like an oil plantation off of the coast of England. They were setting up internet services, various things, saying they were in international waters. I don't remember what country. Obviously, I'm very prepared for this talk, but I don't remember what country it was. But it was some European country, sent in some military people, captured everyone on the island, took them away, and said, you're not doing that. Again, did any country come to their defense? And we have examples of this even in other ways, of people attempting to start new countries, such as Liberland, right? Again, there is a theoretically plausible claim under what ostensibly what international law says. Doesn't work. It's not taken seriously. Doesn't happen, okay? Another attempt is charter. By the way, I want to also say, I'm an optimist. I love this stuff. Try it. Like, I cheer on Liberland. I'm on their mailing list. I believe I've given them some money. Like, I want them to do it. So just when I'm talking about this stuff, if you're into this stuff, support it. Support it. I'm very supportive of all of these things, but I'm just trying to kind of give a sober analysis. But I am very supportive of trying. I'm not against trying any of these things. Charter cities or special economic zones. I think this is one of the most promising ones that could happen. This idea of some sort of new society or state starting inside of an existing one with different rules. Except again, we've seen this tried for a couple of decades now, and they continue to fall apart. And I'll tell you something that literally just happened to me. I was supposed to do a podcast with a guy that was affiliated with one of these special economic zones in Honduras. I don't want to name it. I'm not sure I could even recall it. But I was doing the podcast with him. It didn't end up working it out. We had to move it back a week. And in that week, the Honduras government had revoked the charter for the city. And so this again comes down to how trustworthy is this promise? Will it actually be honored if the thing starts to, succeed? Because for the most part, we haven't seen these really work. Although again, I think we should be optimistic about this idea. I think it's one of the, in terms of outside of the Free State Project, I think it's one of the most promising. And then there's also, you could argue whether this is a different category or not from the Free State Project, but there's sort of like the sort of sub-state level concentration. You're going to build your compound, or you're going to do something at the local level. And this is at varying degrees of success. The failure mode is Waco, okay? But the success case is the Amish. The Amish are the most successful anarchist movement in the United States. They don't pay Social Security. They don't have to register for the draft, okay? I don't think they've achieved what they'd like to achieve or live the way that they exactly want to live either. But those are concessions that basically no one else in America has extracted. And so that's something to look at and kind of say, hey, how did they do that? So I want to talk about why in America libertarianism has, in my opinion, mostly failed. So the sort of conventional answer is that we just need the right communicator. We just need the right expression of the ideas, or a conventional answer. We just need the right arguments. Okay, if we just present things in the right way, people will understand, and then we'll win. And I'm very skeptical of this. I think it is important. I think it can always be done better. But I think we've kind of seen the results of the sort of best in class. Whether that's Ron Paul, most recently, whether that's Milton Friedman putting the ideas out in Free to Choose in the 1980s, or various things. I don't think it's a question of merely doing it better. That if we merely could present the ideas better, that is how it happened. One of the most sort of pessimistic things that I believe, and probably one of the most unpopular things I believe among libertarians, is that a lot of people just aren't libertarians. Among people, especially among people who sort of have political preferences, which most people don't, a lot of people just aren't. And they're not going to change their minds about it either. For a lot of people, it's as likely that they become libertarian through some argument as you get argued into being a socialist. Okay, it's exactly the same. They're in exactly the same place that you are. There's a lot of evidence for this, both evidence in terms of how people express their political preferences when polled, and also how weak they are to experimentation, to through experimentation, how weak they are to being changed through argument. And I also expect that sort of everyone in this room has kind of experienced this. Everyone here, you weren't taught to be a libertarian in school, right? So you kind of discovered it on your own at some point. At least for almost everyone. There are some sort of second, third generation libertarians who kind of were raised in libertarian philosophy, but for the vast majority of libertarians, they discovered it. And so you had some kind of discovery journey. There was someone, whether it was a book or a podcast, maybe it was a mix of people, you heard these ideas and they clicked with you, and you said, oh yeah, I'm a libertarian. This is another one that gets me in trouble, but when I talk about that, I'm like, that actually sounds a lot like how people are gay. You know, they're like, all of a sudden they learned that there was this thing, and they're like, oh my God, that's me. And it is, I think this is kind of how it works, because you went through that. You read that stuff or experienced that stuff, and then you had a friend, and you asked that friend, you asked them to check it out. And did that same thing happen for them? In some cases, yes, but in a lot of cases, no. The stuff that convinced you, that you thought was so persuasive, that moved you, that helped you become a libertarian, if you gave that stuff to a bunch of other people, for the most part, it's not going to make them libertarians, okay? So we kind of have to grapple with that. And then I think the biggest reason, or one of the biggest reasons that because I'm not saying that libertarianism is wrong. I think actually the vast majority of people would like living in a libertarian society, but that's not how we produce it. We produce it through democracy. We produce it through people having this subjective, they're supposed to have their own subjective understanding of how things are supposed to be run. They go in and they raise their arm and they vote, and that's how we actually produce policy. And so this is the sort of third reason that I think libertarianism has mostly lost, and this is basically public choice theory, which I'm not going to spend too much time rehashing this, but it's sort of the structural incentives that are produced by democracy. This is the category of ideas where, like, the special interest group has a bunch of incentive to lobby to get a law passed, and there's no commensurate force to stop that from happening. These kinds of structural incentives encourage the state to grow larger, and there's not that sort of countervening force. And so the actual structure of the way that the government works only sort of encourages it to grow. So this is, so my claims this far are that libertarianism has been failing in America. There are some sort of there are both empirically and some very strong theoretical reasons to believe that will continue to happen. Okay, and yet I'm very hopeful. So I want to talk about why I'm hopeful. I want to talk about some of the things that have been happening here in New Hampshire, and then I'll kind of come back to why. But I want to talk about some of the things that just have been happening. And I think I'll start, actually, since we're here at Porcfest, okay? And everyone here, who's here at Porcfest for the first time? Who's a first-timer? All right, a lot of first-timers here. All right, yeah, thanks for coming out. And, for a lot of these people in particular, they may have never spent much time where they're sort of surrounded by libertarians, okay? And there's something that a lot of people don't even realize this before they have the experience of being surrounded by libertarians, that they're like kind of almost always tailoring the way they talk about things a little bit. They're talking about things a little bit differently. They're being a little bit careful. And then all of a sudden they're around libertarians, all libertarians, and they can kind of be their full selves. I'm not saying that people are being dishonest or hiding things, but it's just a little bit different. And then all of a sudden you're around people who are everyone's a libertarian. And there's sort of this sense of relief, of kind of getting to be yourself. And I put this in the category of sort of the lifestyle that's available in New Hampshire, being surrounded by libertarians, right? And this is evidence that it's working. It's not something that you can do elsewhere. There aren't many places that you could move to and say, I'm going to raise my children, and all of their peers are going to be libertarians, and so on and so on. And this stuff matters. This does matter. And so the other thing you experience at Porcfest is all of the agorism, right? So again, this is evidence of things actually happening that you can now do, that you can go and purchase locally grown food with cryptocurrency from someone who's, trying to stay off the radar. And that's a real network and relationship and peer relationship that you have that's of a different caliber than the relationship with your grocery store or other things, right? And so that's different, that's real, that's something you can't do in a lot of other places. And that goes for a bunch of other things in this category, the homeschooling, these kinds of things. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there's obviously tremendous evidence that at the actual policy level, libertarians are winning here on a lot of fronts, whether that's being the only state to cut taxes and spending, whether that's the ways that they have fought the COVID regime and amended things and done things in the libertarian way, in the principled way, not via executive order, not kind of relying on one person or whatever. One of the really cool things in this space is all of the micro liberties. You've got all these people, some of them are in the room, or some of them you've met at Porcfest, all these people who care about certain areas. And these people go around and they work on and they improve things in those areas. And so that can be stuff like making it really easy to brew beer, or deregulating, like haircuts, or deregulating home food sales, or all of this stuff. It can't really be summarized because it's done in this sort of bottom-up way by all of these people with various things that they care about. Something that I think is very important in terms of why the Free State Project will win is also the way that the brand has changed. Sort of the way that the media or the way that people sort of popularly conceive things, one of the things I've learned in business is that this is frequently more important than the reality. Now, I think New Hampshire has the reality here, but when people like Stephen Colbert or the New York Times are sort of calling New Hampshire crazy or calling New Hampshire libertarian, they are accelerating the sort of trends that are happening where they're kind of encouraging the wrong kinds of people to stay away and encouraging the right kinds of people. Like the libertarian brand that New Hampshire has is really strong right now. And this, I don't have like concrete evidence for this. I really only have like stories and anecdotes. But this is really important. And this is part of the evidence that the Free State Project is winning, because when you have that popular conception, it can very much become a self-reinforcing thing. And then the sort of final example, category of thing that I want to talk about in terms of how the Free State Project has worked is all of the sort of separate from policy, you could call it power, you could call it accomplishments, where that's everything from the incredible amount of property that's owned in the by Free Staters in the state. That the average Free Stater may own more than one piece of property. The various institutions and groups that Free Staters are in. There's, for everyone, for every Free Stater that you're seeing around, there's 5 or 10 more. There's a lot that kind of keep their head down. They're not always coming out, but they're still out there, doing the right thing. And so, in the same way that sort of some people that may have anti-libertarian values have sort of become embedded in a bunch of institutions, I think there are Free Staters in a bunch of places inside of New Hampshire, as well as institutions that have been created by Free Staters, things like the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, where there's not a comparable organization in other states. This is influence, this is effect in the real world, what this stuff is able to do. And 10 years ago at Porcfest, there was a guy named Jason Osborne who was singing karaoke down here on the main stage, and I don't know if he had moved yet from Michigan or was about to move, and now he's the House Majority Leader of the State of Representatives, of the House of Representatives here in New Hampshire. House Majority Leader, 10 years. And that's, the Free Staters have never had so many people elected and in so many different positions. So it feels to me, living here, that things, at least policy-wise, politics-wise, have gotten worse over the last 10, 20, 30 years. But in New Hampshire, especially over the last 10, and even more so over the last 2, things have continued to get better. So I want to talk about And by the way, I'm probably about 10 minutes from done, so start thinking of questions if you have any. So I want to talk about now some of the theoretical reasons that these things have been happening. Why is the Free State Project succeeding? We have this evidence. One of the first I want to talk about, and this attracted me into moving here. I've always been a startup guy into entrepreneurship, but startups specifically, it's how do you get things to scale? How do you get things to grow really big? And one of the really important properties to look for in a good company is something where each customer lowers the marginal cost of the next customer, right? So if it costs me $5 to get my first customer, maybe it'll cost me $4 to get my next 10, and each one is getting cheaper and cheaper in terms of as I get them, right? This is a very good property for a business to have, because as you get more customers, getting more customers gets even easier. Well, this very much describes the Free State Project, right? The people here who are in the first, couple hundred people who committed, who came up with the idea, they're very brave people. I wouldn't have been that brave. I wouldn't have been one of those people. But they made it easier for me to come. And I came when there were a couple of thousand people here, right? And I will hopefully make it easier for other people to come. And so it has that same kind of thing where it gets easier and easier for each person to choose to do it. Another property the Free State Project has in common with very successful endeavors is that it's hard to compete with, okay? If you were to try to do the same thing, if you were to try to start a new Free State Project, why would anyone choose yours? You've already got so many things that are built up here. And in many ways, I know there was, and I'm actually going to contradict this with something I say in like 5 minutes, but in many ways, the state was arguably irrelevant. I know there was a bunch of debate over it. I think New Hampshire was a very good choice for some reasons I'm going to actually talk on in a second. But the most important thing was establishing that consensus and getting that momentum going, because it has these sort of self-reinforcing properties that cause it to continue to accelerate. So it's kind of winner take all. And I encourage competition, by the way. Like, again, if people want to try things, we should encourage people to try things. People want to say, hey, move to, wherever. Let them try their thing. Let's encourage that. Good luck, okay? But I think it's very unlikely that there be multiple kind of competing ones. And the other important thing here, this ties back to the brand stuff I talked about in terms of the way the consciousness has been developing around New Hampshire. There's no incentive the other way. There is no reason for someone, or very few reasons, there's always idiosyncratic reasons, but there's few broad reasons for someone who is against libertarianism, who has these sort of strong political preferences, to come here. You may have people who have ambivalent political preferences who move here because they like the job market or they like the place or whatever. But in terms of people who have strong political preferences, those people who are like, I'm really a progressive, I'm really a socialist, I'm really a communist, the people who are going to go out there and sort of do the most to stop the things that we want to do, why would they come to New Hampshire? There's not a reason to come to New Hampshire. If you're politically ambitious, it doesn't make sense to be here. Okay, if you're identifying yourself with a state that is the opposite of who you want to be. And I see this on social media even, where these people who most oppose liberty in New Hampshire, they'll set their location as New England rather than New Hampshire. You'll see this a lot. There's a sense in which literally some people are growing to be ashamed, like they're like embarrassed to be from New Hampshire, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's so beautiful. I talked earlier about how like most people aren't, or a lot of people aren't libertarians. I think more people would be, maybe if they were sort of raised or taught to be libertarian. A lot of people's sort of mentalities end up being somewhat fixed. But I think another big factor is that a lot of people are really agreeable. They just don't care that much how things are run. This is like why Nazism works, right? There's like, well, all right, everyone's a Nazi. I guess I'll be a Nazi. That's what my neighbors are into it. And this is kind of the way that a lot of people develop their beliefs. They're not, I know a lot of people here like to think things through first principles, or like to, really think deeply about these things. A lot of people are like, well, all right, I've got 3 neighbors, and 2 of them are for gay marriage. Gay marriage sounds okay to me. That will, cause the least strife. And actually, it's not even that calculated of a thing. They're not even consciously, being that way. It's literally like that's just the way that they arrive at decisions of things. And we have all kinds of, again, psychological experiments in terms of, you set people up and you have them give fake answers, with a subject, and how often does the subject copy fake answers? Things like where they're literally observing reality and they observe it in the wrong way. Or the Milgram experiment, where people are, just go along with things. This is the reality of a lot of people. And so there's this sense in which a minority, even a small minority who cares a lot about something, will frequently get their way, especially when people don't care that much about it one way or another. Now, in some of the liberty stuff, people do care. On a lot of the liberty stuff, people don't. And so just 1% being really loud, they win. A classic example of this is kosher foods. You go into the grocery store, an incredible amount of foods are certified kosher. How many people care if food is kosher? Maybe like 1% of people, okay? But because they care a lot, that kind of thing happens. Some people call this the tyranny of the minority, but in this case, it's in our favor because we're a very loud and committed minority. And related, this is also why I know sometimes people sort of have disdain for just posting on social media. But the truth is, a lot of people form their opinions by sort of surveying the opinions that are on social media. So when the libertarians are commenting on the newspaper pages, on the town pages, on this kind of stuff, this really does, it actually does change minds. And libertarians, it feels like there's a lot more of us, I'll tell you. If you go on to the Facebook pages for the local newspapers, if you go on to your town Facebook pages in New Hampshire, this kind of thing, the Free Staters are loud. Well, they're prevalent, maybe. They're not loud. I think a lot of them conduct themselves very politely and very well. So I'm not saying they're like in there shouting at people, but they shift the consensus because they're way more likely to be participating in the conversation. And so this is this fact that a lot of people are agreeable. There's a small number of us, but we're very active. This is part of how you have that kind of outsized impact. And this is the sort of reason that such a small number of people can do this kind of thing. I do want to talk about the structure of New Hampshire's government specifically, because this is another thing. This is, I think, a smaller one on the scale of things, but I do think it's made things work faster. And so a lot of people don't know that New Hampshire has an incredibly large government, and that might sound bad, it's large, but the state legislature has, I should know the number, but I don't, over 400. I see a state rep in the audience. If someone wants to shout the number out, it's over 400. Yeah. Okay, so 431 if I tallied that up correctly, so this makes it very difficult to even field a candidate in every state race. You're talking about a representative for every around 3,000 people in New Hampshire, and this actually changes the incentives a lot. And they're only paid $200. They're only paid $200. So this means that money matters less in the races. You could literally knock every door. It means that because it's hard to find candidates, it's harder for the parties to have strong control. And it means that when you've got a bunch of free staters who are like, I'll run for office, that a bunch of them end up getting elected. And some of them end up being quite popular. And so it also, and then when they end up being quite popular, it means that they don't have to worry. And they can introduce bills that say New Hampshire should secede from the United States, or that the people should vote on it. People should vote on it. And they get to do that. And this ties into the other stuff. What does that do? That further reinforces the New Hampshire brand. People go, New Hampshire, that's the state people want to secede. That sounds terrible. I don't want to move there. And so it has, and then again, what does that do? That makes it easier for other people who are the good people, who are the people we want. They look at New Hampshire and they say, I want to go there. right? And so it has these reinforcing dynamics that lead to something that I think is really successful. One other thing I want to hit on here, I talked about sort of the public choice theory, the structural reasons that government tends to grow larger and not smaller. And I don't think New Hampshire fixes these wholly, by the way. I think a lot of these flaws, these incentives, still exist in the New Hampshire government structure. I think some of them are mitigated by free state culture, because free state culture can create its own set of incentives where when I lived in Philadelphia, I didn't care about voting. It seemed worthless. I didn't really do it a lot. Here in New Hampshire, there's a different set of incentives where there's a sort of community incentive to do it, and that kind of thing. So maybe this can mitigate some of this stuff by us actually changing the incentives. We can also change the incentives for our neighbors and this kind of thing in terms of for them to participate in ways that are pro-liberty. But I do think, just to be fair and honest, I think some of this stuff does still exist in New Hampshire. It's a lot more work to move in the liberty direction than it is to move in the sort of anti-liberty direction. We're doing it anyway. It's still happening. But I think this is something that, just to be fair about. I think also what happens in New Hampshire is, again, this concept of how is policy implemented, what's the actual power structures in the real world versus the policies. And I think here, again, free staters are winning. Like when the governor did do stuff over COVID, but the governor was very aware that there would be this vociferous minority who would tolerate very little. So like everything always came with a carve out, where that could be, you could just say that you had a medical issue with wearing a mask and you didn't have to produce evidence and things like this. So I think, or other examples are like, I think a lot of the police are aware of people being free staters. And most police officers, they just want to do a job. They want to collect a paycheck. Some of them suck, but a lot of them are just like, just average guy, like, they don't want anything too bad to happen, but they also don't want to get messed with. They just want to do a job. And if you know that some person knows their rights very well, 30 people are going to show up at the courthouse, they're going to fight the thing all the way, you're like, do I want to deal with that? Do I want to pull that guy over? I think there are probably a couple of cops who are like enough against the Free State Project that a very small number maybe go out. But I think the vast majority of cops, I've had some interactions where I'm like, I don't understand that interaction unless the cop was like, I don't want to deal with a Free Stater. Like, I don't understand why the cop acted that way towards me. I've had some other interactions with other people in the Free State Project with similar things. I mean, we've won cases against the cops. We've won money against the cops. And so this is one of those things where you have the sort of like letter of the law, and then you have what's actually possible when you have so many people working together to achieve that kind of end and who are willing to fight hard to do it. And this ties back to the Amish. This is the way the Amish got out of it. I mean, when the Amish, I don't remember if this was Social Security or the draft, but like they literally just said, we're not doing it. And a bunch of them got arrested and they're just like, okay, we're in jail now. We're still not gonna do it. And eventually like the government caved. There's this sense of, I've seen this privately with regulators. There's sort of a sour grapes aspect of the way that the government attempts to control things, where they want to control them, but then if there's a point at which they can't, they didn't want to, is sort of the attitude that they express towards things. Cryptography, the way the government attempted to regulate cryptography in the like 1990s would be another example of this kind of phenomenon. And so there's this sense, I think, in which that as we get stronger and make it harder for the government to do things, the part of the government's response is actually like, well, we didn't want to do those things anyway. We're the government. We can do whatever we want, and we can't do that, so we didn't want to. And I'm serious. This is sort of the, yeah. And then I've got one final thing to talk about, which is the fact that the way that we're doing this is very bottom-up and evolutionary. We're building something new. It is, again, a lot like a startup, but we're building, we don't have a model that we're copying. We have a direction we want to go in, we have a thing we want to achieve, but we don't know exactly what it is. We're going to make some mistakes along the way. And I think this way, comparing it to sort of some of the like charter city type stuff where you're going like, okay, top down, I'm going to do this new thing. Here we're kind of starting with this existing thing, and we're working together to evolve it and to change it into something that's the thing that we actually want. And I think that this has potentially a lot of benefits because it's sort of easier to make mistakes and adjust and learn and figure things out as you go. And then the other thing is that the state also wasn't built in this top-down way. And so in that same kind of how do I build this new thing, having that same bottom-up kind of knowledge where you have all these people who understand, and because like naively you could say the answer is, oh, I'll just get rid of everything. But that doesn't really work. That's the reason we have, common law and all this built-up history. You have all of these complex situations that arise in human interactions where we disagree with one another. We need to settle these disputes. There's a lot of structural stuff there that's good. We're not trying to throw away everything. We're not trying to do something so radical that, nothing. We're keeping a lot of it. There's a lot that we like. And so rather than, sort of trying to start top down and do this new thing, you're taking this existing thing and you're kind of cutting out the parts that were bad. And I think that's a lot of the parts, to be clear. I think there's a lot that should, the vast majority of it, I think, can end up going away. But I don't think the answer would be, I think this is still better, potentially. I don't know if I'd buy this one. But maybe, could be true. So on that incredibly strong conclusion, I do think there's a bunch of both. There's incredibly strong concrete evidence that things are getting better in New Hampshire. There's strong concrete evidence that things are getting worse in just about every other place. And then I think there are theoretical reasons that both of those trends are going to continue, okay? That New Hampshire is going to continue to get better and going to continue to succeed. Most other places are going to continue to get worse. I'm not trying to be black-pilled on every alternative. Hold out hope for some of this other stuff, and if you want to put your time and energy into other stuff, I'm supportive. But I think it's very likely that this is the best strategy that exists right now. I think it's very likely that liberty continues to lose in most other places. And so my position currently is that I'm not trying to coast. I'm ready to keep working hard. But that is more of like a when this happens via these incentives. Like, how long does it take? Are we talking about 10 years or 30 years? And less like, does it happen at all? As long as we keep doing the work and as long as more people here we keep accelerating, I think it's going to happen faster and faster. So thank you. That is why the Free State Project will continue to win. Thank you. Got 10 minutes for questions if people have any. Yeah, come up, I think, for the video.
Couple of comments first. So it's Quakers did the anti-war thing. They didn't have to sign up. It was Amish for Social Security. Also, as other states get more tyrannical, even just holding your own in New Hampshire puts you higher on the list, as it were.
Great point.
I think the biggest argument against the Free State Project is that there's not a lot of focus on one particular thing. So there's not one thing that New Hampshire is great at. If you want, hookers, machine guns, gambling, go to Nevada, right? If you want, low property taxes, there's New Mexico. What do you, I get that where there's the libertarians living together. Is there something else besides just sort of having your kids grow up amongst libertarians that New Hampshire speaks to you about as a singular number one? We're the freest state in this way.
Well, that would be my number one answer, and maybe that's a bit of a personal one, but I do think raising kids is got to be one of the most powerful answers. Again, as someone who's nerdy about this stuff, there's where you raise your kids matters so much. Who your kids are spending time around, the peer groups. The kids don't just copy their parents, they copy everything around them. And so to be able to give them a lot of exposure to libertarian ideas, libertarian values, I think that's one of the biggest things. But I think generally, it's beyond that, even for people without kids, like there's not a it's like a 1% lower tax burden wouldn't have replaced, 10,000 people who want to say screw you to anything related to COVID happening. So I think it's like, I think we're winning on policy, but I think that policy actually isn't even the number one reason to be here. So, yeah.
Yeah, I believe this country is going down toward a dark path. Do you feel like as more and more Americans experience more hardship, will they be more receptive to the libertarian message? Thank you.
Maybe. I'm hopeful. But at the same time, I'm kind of pessimistic on this one. Like something that libertarians used to say 5 years ago is, well, if the government ever, started being really tyrannical, then people would become libertarian. But we just saw the government be more tyrannical than it ever was, and people got really excited about it, and most people liked it. So empirically, most people liked, again, we have to grapple with this reality that even today, I think something should the government lock down again if something like COVID happened, the polls are I believe, even about over 50% today. And they were way higher when it was happening. If they're not over 50, I don't know the exact numbers, but this stuff was popular. We have to grapple with that. And so I'm not convinced, inflation is record high. People understand this. They understand that the prices are higher. Libertarians have been saying forever that this is the kind of thing that causes. How many points did we score? Did CNN put the libertarians on and say, "Hey, look, these guys called it"? So it does. Yeah. So we've got to kind of grapple with that. So I don't think it would happen. I hope it would though, but I don't think it would.
So I know that a significant amount of the FSP is either voluntarist, anarchist, anarcho-capitalist. And even though I'm a voluntarist, I believe in voting defensively in cases like this. So I'm not suggesting that we don't vote or anything like that. But how do you think it's going to end up as more and more people realize the complete illegitimacy of government, the criminality of government, and how do you think the FSP is going to ultimately transition from having a kind of only protecting life, liberty, and property to getting rid of government completely?
Yeah, so I think that most people aren't even capable of expressing an understanding of the idea of something like the illegitimacy of government. I think that's a level of abstraction that's actually just beyond a lot of people, to be honest. I think a lot of people would be happy in a libertarian society because they would be more prosperous, because things would work better for them. They'd live in a better society. So I think a lot of people, but that's how most people, I think, are actually thinking about things. And I think that even, and then there is a class of people who are capable of understanding that kind of idea, and they're never going to buy into it. And so I think there are more and more people who will buy into it. And of course, I believe, I buy into it. And I think there are more people who will continue to do that. But I don't think it's going to be won ideologically in that way. I don't, that's maybe a part of the victory, but I don't think that's the way the victory actually happens, if that makes sense.
So given scarce resources and the way our state system works, what do you think the optimal mix of state versus local focus is here for our energies?
That's a great question. I actually think, local school board stuff is very valuable because this is, your property taxes are local and your property taxes are all going to schools, over half of them, right? 10, 12, 14 times as much money are going to schools as police, similar numbers versus roads, where it's much more on schools. So you can have a local impact there. I mean, I think given that sort of the Free States orientation is we're trying to, I'm of two minds of this, to be honest. So principally, we should be doing things as locally as possible, and so therefore the state shouldn't be interfering with local affairs. We should be able to decide things at a municipal level and so on and so forth. Pragmatically, because the state exists and there's various reasons that we have to be winning at the state level to accomplish what we want, I'm kind of totally cool with the state just being like, libertarian rule for the whole state, screw you towns, which is not the principled answer. But New Hampshire is a Dillon rule state, which means that only municipalities, only rights explicitly granted to municipalities, so the state can do whatever they want. So as far as I'm concerned, if libertarians take over the state, like using the state to dominate Portsmouth and dominate the blue towns and further drive those people out, like I'm 100% for it. So that is my unprincipled but strategic answer.
My question is actually very similar to that. Is there, because freedom is working at the state level, is there a front runner region or city that's going to be freedom in our lifetime first?
Yeah, so there's probably several in contention. I think the three that are at the front of my mind as contention are Ware, Grafton, and Croydon, where there's really high densities of libertarians in these areas. They're relatively rural, low population, and Grafton was the original attempt at this. But I think there's some other places that have also kind of stepped up here. Mark may actually feel free to chime in on some other places. You may know a bit more than I do.
No, that's a good starting list. You're doing a great job, Jeremy, and the whole organization is amazing. Seems like you guys fight above your weight class. So how is the organization funded, and how can people at Porcfest and across the country support what you're doing?
That is such a great question, monthly donor Mark Warden. And if you, like Mark, would like to be a monthly donor, we are a very poor organization. So everyone talks about this Coke money. It's not there. It's not real. We are entirely, almost entirely small donor funded. And so we do really appreciate people who can become monthly donors. fsp.org/give. $5 or $10 a month or $25 a month goes a really long way. You can also do one-time donations. But we are getting that's the thing, is we're not getting it done. We shout about what other people do. So I do want to be clear, the Free State Project does not take credit for everything that all the individuals in New Hampshire are doing. But we need to get more people here. That's what the Free State Project does. I think that's the easiest way to keep winning, and definitely financial support goes a long way. So, right, Rebecca's cool. We like her, right? Yeah. We just hired Rebecca. So, and she's doing a great job getting people involved as new people come in, getting them plugged in, getting them involved in the state, and helping with events and stuff like this. So, all right, am I done, Scott? Is this the end? About a minute. One more question. Anyone have one more question? All right, I win. All counter arguments have been defeated. I declare victory. Have a good day, everyone.